Before you sell that plain pearl necklace at your next yard sale or toss those old pearl earrings into a donation bag, there's something you really need to hear. Some of the most valuable pearl jewelry in the world looks completely ordinary. The kind of thing that gets overlooked in a drawer for 30 years because nobody bothered to check what it actually was. Today, we're counting down 10 common pieces of pearl jewelry that could secretly be worth a fortune. Pieces that look so ordinary, most people would never think twice about them. And there's a good chance one of them is already sitting in your own house right now, closer than you think. Think about how many pearl pieces have passed through your own family over the years without anyone ever stopping to really look at them. A necklace worn to a wedding decades ago and never worn again. A pair of earrings tucked into a small box after a grandmother passed away. A brooch that got moved from one drawer to another every time someone cleaned house, never once examined closely, never once questioned. Pearls have this strange reputation of being seen as simple, modest, almost boring compared to diamonds or gemstones, and that reputation is exactly what causes so many valuable pieces to slip through unnoticed. Nobody expects a small, unassuming pearl to be worth real money, so nobody bothers checking. That is the gap we're going to close today, one piece at a time, starting with the pieces almost everyone has seen before and ending with the one that could genuinely change everything. Keep in mind as we go through this list that price alone is never the whole story either. Even a modest piece worth a few $100s is still money that most people would have thrown away entirely, and that difference between something and nothing is exactly why this kind of careful looking matters so much. Number 10, the simple graduated freshwater pearl strand. This is the piece almost every family has somewhere, a single strand of pearls that gets slightly bigger toward the center, usually bought sometime between the 1960s and the 1980s, as a gift, a wedding present, or a special occasion piece. Most people look at these and assume they're worth almost nothing because freshwater pearls have flooded the market for decades, and everyone knows you can buy a cheap strand at the mall today for $20. But here's what most people miss. The freshwater strands from that earlier era were often grown slower, with thicker layers building up over more years, which gives them a depth of shine that a lot of rushed modern production simply cannot match. When one of these older strands has held onto its even color, its smooth surface, and a solid gold or gold-filled clasp, it can still bring real money today. Good examples in that range regularly sell for $300 to $900, and the ones with an unusually large size or a rare natural tint can climb even higher. The ones that get sold for $5 at an estate sale are gone forever, and that's the part that always gets me a little. If you have one of these sitting in a box because it looks plain and forgettable, take it out, look at the clasp, and have someone who actually understands pearl quality take a real look before you let it go for nothing. A lot of these strands also carry small hallmarks stamped into the clasp itself, sometimes a country of origin, sometimes a carat mark, sometimes a tiny maker's initials that most people never even notice because the clasp is the smallest part of the entire piece. Those tiny stamps can tell you almost everything about where and when the strand was made, and that information alone can shift a piece from the pile marked worthless to the pile marked worth researching further. Number 9, the single pearl pendant on a delicate chain. This is one of the most common pieces of pearl jewelry ever made. A lone pearl hanging from a thin gold chain, often given as a first piece of real jewelry to a young woman, a graduation gift, or a simple everyday necklace passed down from a mother or grandmother. Because it's so plain and so common, almost nobody thinks twice about it. What gets missed is that the age of the setting and the quality of the pearl itself can completely change the story. Older pendants set in solid 14 or 18 karat gold, especially ones with a slightly irregular or naturally toned pearl instead of a perfectly uniform white one, often turn out to be worth far more than people expect. I've seen simple single pearl pendants bring $400 to $2,000 once someone actually looked closely at the gold purity, the setting style, and the pearl's true origin. The plain, humble look is exactly why these get overlooked. Nobody expects a fortune to be hanging from a thin little chain in the back of a jewelry box, and that's precisely why so many of them slip through the cracks. There's also a habit people have of assuming that because a piece is simple, it must also be recent, and that assumption alone causes a lot of genuinely old pendants to get mixed in with cheap modern replicas without anyone ever separating the two. Number 8, the classic pearl stud earring set. Almost every woman has owned a pair of these at some point, small round pearls sitting on simple gold or silver posts, worn to work, to church, to weddings, to almost everything. Because they're so common, most people assume they're basically worthless, and honestly, a lot of them are. But the older sets, especially the ones marked with a jeweler's hallmark on the back of the post or the butterfly clasp, tell a very different story. When the pearls have a deep, almost glowing luster and the gold setting shows real weight and craftsmanship instead of a thin, hollow shell, these studs can be worth far more than their tiny size suggests. Solid, well-made vintage pearl studs with strong luster and real gold settings typically bring $200 to $800, and rare larger sizes with exceptional shine can go higher still. The mistake people make is judging these by their size. A tiny pearl stud takes up almost no space in a jewelry box, which is exactly why it's so easy to overlook, misplace, or accidentally sell for pocket change without ever checking what it really was. It doesn't help that studs get separated from their original boxes almost immediately, which means the small paper tag or receipt that might have told you exactly where a pair came from is usually long gone by the time anyone thinks to ask questions about them. Number 7, the multi-strand pearl choker. These bold, layered pieces were incredibly popular from the 1950s through the 1980s, several strands of pearls twisted or layered together, often finished with a decorative clasp studded with small stones. They have a strong, glamorous look that feels a little old-fashioned today, which is exactly why so many end up forgotten in the back of a jewelry box instead of being worn. What people don't realize is that these pieces contain a significant amount of pearl material, sometimes 3, 4, or even 5 full strands, which means the total value adds up fast when the pearls themselves are good quality. A well-preserved multi-strand choker with matching pearls and an intact original clasp can sell for $600 to $2,500, and the ones with a signed designer clasp or unusual color combination can bring even more. If you have one of these sitting in a drawer because the bold, layered look feels outdated, don't judge it by the style. Judge it by the weight of pearl sitting in your hands, because that weight is exactly what collectors are paying for. It's also worth remembering that these chokers were often worn for formal occasions only, which means a surprising number of them survived in near perfect condition simply because they weren't worn often enough to suffer everyday wear and tear. And that untouched condition is a huge part of what makes the best surviving examples so valuable today. Number 6, Baroque pearl pieces with irregular, uneven shapes. For a long time, Baroque pearls were considered the less desirable option compared to perfectly round pearls, which meant they were often sold cheaper and used in more casual, everyday jewelry. That reputation has completely flipped in recent years. Collectors and designers now actively seek out Baroque pearls specifically because of their unique, organic shapes, and older pieces featuring natural Baroque pearls in gold settings have become genuinely sought after. A vintage Baroque pearl necklace or pendant with real gold work and strong natural luster can sell for $500 to $2,000 depending on the size and uniqueness of the shapes. The irony here is almost funny. The very pieces that were once considered the flawed, imperfect option are now some of the most interesting and valuable finds precisely because no two of them look alike. If you have an oddly shaped pearl piece that never quite looked like the perfectly round pearls in magazine ads, that irregularity might be exactly what makes it valuable today. It's worth remembering, too, that nature never repeats itself exactly, which means a genuine Baroque pearl piece is, in a very literal sense, one of a kind, something that cannot be recreated even by the most skilled modern jeweler working with today's cultivation methods. Number 5, pearl and gemstone cluster rings. These are the rings that combine a central pearl with small diamonds, sapphires, or other stones clustered around it. Extremely popular from the early 1900s through the mid-century as engagement alternatives and cocktail rings. Because pearls are softer and less flashy than diamonds, these rings often get dismissed as the less important, less valuable option, sitting in a jewelry box full of other pieces. That assumption is a mistake. When the surrounding stones are genuine and the gold or platinum setting is well made, these rings carry real value, sometimes more than people expect, from a piece that looks understated at first glance. Good examples typically bring $700 to $3,000, with the older, more intricately designed settings from before the 1950s often performing the best. The detail work in these older cluster settings, the tiny hand-cut prongs, the mill-grain edges, the delicate filigree, is something that's genuinely difficult and expensive to reproduce today, which is exactly why serious buyers are willing to pay for it. And unlike a plain solitaire, these cluster rings tend to carry a strong sense of the era they came from, which makes them appealing not just to jewelry buyers, but to collectors who care specifically about design history, adding yet another layer of demand on top of the raw material value. Now, before we get into the top 4, here's something worth pausing on. Most people judge jewelry the same way they judge a book by its cover, based purely on how shiny, big, or modern it looks. But real value almost never announces itself. It hides in small details most people never think to check. The purity mark stamped into the metal, the way a clasp was constructed, the subtle glow of a pearl surface under the right light. Once you start paying attention to those small details instead of the overall flash of a piece, you start seeing your own jewelry box completely differently. So before you go through your own collection after this video, remember that the plainest, most forgettable pieces are often exactly the ones worth stopping to examine a little more carefully. It also helps to remember that value is almost never about how a piece makes you feel when you glance at it in a drawer. It's about what a trained eye finds when they actually take the time to look closely, checking the metal, checking the surface of the pearl under strong light, checking for the tiny imperfections and markings that separate the ordinary from the exceptional. That kind of patience is rare, which is exactly why so many valuable pieces stay hidden for decades, sometimes even generations, simply because nobody ever slowed down long enough to really look. All right, let's get back to the countdown. Number 4, cultured Akoya bridal sets. These are the matching necklace, earring, and sometimes bracelet sets that were extremely popular wedding gifts and bridal purchases from the 1960s through the 1990s, made with small, perfectly round, high-luster Akoya pearls from Japan. Because they were mass-produced and widely purchased, a lot of people assume every set is basically the same and therefore not worth very much individually. But complete, matching bridal sets with strong, mirror-like luster and original gold clasps are becoming harder to find intact because pieces get separated, lost, or damaged over the decades. A full matching set in excellent condition, especially with pearls in the 7 to 8 millimeter range, can sell for $1,000 to $3,500 when everything still matches perfectly. Broken up sets, missing one piece or another, lose a surprising amount of that combined value. If you have a complete bridal set from your own wedding or one inherited from a relative, keep every piece together because the full matching set is worth considerably more than the sum of its separated parts. Weddings tend to be one of the few occasions where people actually keep receipts, boxes, and paperwork, so if you still have any of that original documentation tucked away somewhere, it's worth digging it out, because it can make the difference between guessing at a piece's origin and knowing it for certain. Number 3, Mabe pearl pendants and rings. Mabe pearls are the large, dome-shaped, half-round pearls that were especially popular in bold statement jewelry during the 1970s and 1980s, often set in wide gold mountings as pendants, rings, or earrings. Because they're technically a blister pearl rather than a fully round pearl, some people assume they're a lesser, cheaper category, and a lot of cheap costume versions certainly exist. But genuine Mabe pearls with real nacre, strong iridescent luster, and quality gold settings are a completely different story. Their large size alone makes them dramatic and eye-catching, and well-preserved vintage examples with real craftsmanship behind them can bring $800 to $2,500. What throws people off is the sheer size of these pieces. A pearl that large feels like it must be fake simply because it doesn't match the small, delicate pearls most people are used to seeing. That assumption is exactly backwards, and it's exactly why these bold, oversized pieces so often get dismissed as costume jewelry when they're anything but. It's a strange kind of irony, honestly, that the very boldness meant to make these pieces stand out in a room is the same quality that makes modern viewers assume they can't possibly be genuine, when in reality the boldness was the whole point of owning one in the first place. Number 2, Edwardian and early 20th century pearl brooches. These are the ornate pins, often shaped like bows, flowers, wreaths, or crescents, encrusted with tiny seed pearls set into fine platinum or gold work, worn as everyday accents on collars, lapels, and hats during the early 1900s. They look delicate, fussy, and old-fashioned to modern eyes, which is exactly why so many end up forgotten in the bottom of a jewelry box or sold for almost nothing at estate sales. What people don't realize is that these pieces required an enormous amount of skilled handwork. Tiny pearls set one by one into intricate metal frames, using techniques and patience that simply don't exist in mass production today. A well-preserved brooch from this era with intact pearls and fine metalwork can bring $1,500 to $5,000, and the more elaborate designs with larger centerpiece pearls go even higher. The delicate, fragile appearance that makes people underestimate these brooches is actually the exact reason they took so long to make and why they're genuinely rare to find intact more than a century later. These brooches also tend to get treated as purely decorative curiosities rather than serious jewelry, tossed into a box with buttons and old coins simply because nobody stopped to consider that the tiny pearls covering the surface might be original, natural, and irreplaceable rather than cheap glass imitations added later. It's the kind of overlooked category where a 5-minute inspection under a jeweler's loupe can completely rewrite what you assumed a forgotten pin was worth, turning something destined for a donation bin into a piece worth insuring properly. Number 1, inherited natural pearl pieces from before the 1920s. And this is the one that can completely change everything. Any pearl jewelry that genuinely dates from before commercial culturing became widespread in the 1920s carries the real possibility of containing natural, wild-form pearls rather than the cultured pearls that make up almost all modern jewelry. That distinction changes the value conversation entirely. Cultured pearls, even excellent ones, are produced by the millions today, while genuine natural pearls from that earlier era are finite and mostly sitting quietly in old family jewelry that nobody has properly examined. When one of these pieces turns out to be authentic, the value can jump from a few $100s into the tens of thousands, and truly exceptional examples with documented history have sold for staggering amounts at major auctions. Most people who inherit an old pearl piece assume it's just sentimental, not financially significant, and honestly,